The San Antonio Spurs last year were one of the worst teams in the NBA, but with multiple top 10 picks in the draft, ending their season 7-3 in their last 10 games, and Victor Wembanyama showing Hall of Fame potential already, they could absolutely kill this offseason and potentially make the play-in next year, but it all starts with draft night. If I were the Spurs GM, the one thing I would absolutely want to do is trade for an elite point guard. Don't depend on the draft when you don't have to. Players like Trae Young and Darius Garland are available and could do the one thing that the Spurs desperately need, and that is set Victor up for easy looks at the rim, or easy looks anywhere on the court for that matter. Trae Young has made Clint Capella so much money in the NBA, who's a 6'10 inside center with absolutely no offensive skills besides setting screens. I can only imagine what Trae would make Wemby look like. And ever since Jared Allen came to Cleveland next to Garland, he's been a consistent all-star level center. I think Wemby is such an elite talent that gambling on the draft and potentially wasting a year or two of this man's career could be a huge loss for the franchise. A potential Trae Young package would look like Keldon Johnson, Devontae Graham, and giving the Hawks their 2025 and 2027 picks back. And as a Hawks fan, I'd be happy with this package because we can't rebuild without getting our 2025 pick back. So what do y'all think? Is this a good trade for both sides? And then a Garland trade would be a bit more complicated because I don't think there's a good package without making the trade 3 or 4 teams deep, but it could definitely get done and probably for even less than the trade package. So that would be the first thing that I probably do, but it honestly doesn't even look like they're going to make a trade before the NBA draft, so let's just assume that they keep their picks 4 and 8. The number one prospect that the Spurs should hope fall to pick 4 is Zachary Rizager. While I'm not the highest on Rizager as an overall prospect, the Spurs would be an amazing fit for his game, and no, it is not because of the French connection. Wemby is the lengthiest player in the NBA, and if you can double down on that without giving up spacing on the offensive end, then the other NBA teams will dread playing you. Rizager is a great 3-and-D player who can finish around the basket if you hit him on cuts or in the fast break. I think his lack of self-creation is a bit concerning for him to ever be looked at as a potential all-star, and his on-ball defense doesn't stand out too much, but if he could just play great help defense and cover as much of the court as he can, while potentially being a 40% three-point shooter, I just see this as being the safest and best pick in the draft. You just gotta hope that he falls to 4. Now the real question is, would it be worth it for the Spurs to trade up to pick 2 if it's looking like Rizager is going to Washington? Personally, I wouldn't trade an extra first round pick just to move up 2 spots in a draft like this, so who else would I consider drafting? In my mock draft in my last video, I had the Spurs pick Rob Dillingham over Rizager because while Rizager is a better prospect, I think if a GM falls in love with a particular guard, that's exactly what the organization will prioritize, even if a better wing prospect is available. Rob Dillingham is a prospect that definitely has its flaws, but is way too good of an offensive point guard to not think about. I feel like most of his flaws, like his size and defense, could easily be hidden by Victor Wembanyama and Greg Popovich. Last year, the Spurs offense was terrible, with no one on the roster being able to create for themselves, and Rob Dillingham is the most shifty scorer in the entire draft. He's got one of those handles that are really fun to watch in hoop mixtapes, but in his year at Kentucky, he used it very effectively, almost never doing too much, and just beating his defender the second that he created an advantage. But the most intriguing part of his game to me is honestly his off-ball scoring potential mixed in with his self-creation. At Kentucky, he didn't have the ball in his hands the majority of every possession, but he was still able to light a spark off the bench with his shooting off a down screen, easy fast break points because of his speed, and his ability to attack a late rotation off the catch. He could easily be Victor Wembanyama's Tyrese Maxey if he puts the work in the next couple years. Now, those are the 2 main guys I would prioritize drafting if I were San Antonio, but there is a good chance that Rizager goes 2 to Washington and Rob Dillingham does go 3 to Houston. So who else would I draft? Well, this is my big board for players I would draft at 4, so let's go over it. First guy on my Spurs big board is Ron Holland. You could say Holland's lack of a 3-point shot is concerning, but everything else is exactly what the Spurs need. He can get to the rim with the ball, cut to the basket off the ball, run in transition, and is very versatile defensively, and is the first guy I've talked about so far in this video that I think can actually be the Spurs' future primary defender. Next is Reed Shepherd, a sharpshooter with high IQ and potential to be even more. I mean, he's just a good basketball player, and the upside of this pick is even if he shows very little ability to create on the ball, which is very possible, he could be a great backup, playing like a Bogdan Bogdanovic role, and that's his floor in my opinion. Stephon Castle would be an interesting fit because he would immediately be the team's best point of attack defender, but the Spurs need a main facilitator, which Castle wants to be, but not showing much of that at UConn can leave you a bit concerned, so it's a gamble. I think I believe in him, but his lack of separation off the dribble versus college level players is not ideal, so the most ideal situation for him to thrive would be playing next to a point guard his rookie season, and occasionally switch roles when they need him to. And maybe I'm just hating on Trey Jones, but if they pick a point guard here, they are probably going to start year 1. I just don't think Trey Jones is the starting point guard of the Spurs for the future. And then I guess this is a hot take, but all the way at 7, I have Nikola Topic. I'm honestly not a fan of any NBA player that looks like they can't contribute without the basketball, unless you are an offensive engine like Trae Young or Luka Doncic. He is by far the best facilitator and would technically help Wemby out the most, but if you can't shoot or defend at a high level, it's hard for me to believe in you. Making a big board for pick 8 is really hard because it just really depends on who they pick at 4, so let me just say this. If you pick a guard at 4, then there are 2 forwards that you should look into drafting. Ron Holland I already talked about, but the other is Dalton Knecht. I don't care how old he is, if you see a bucket that you only have to pay a total of $30 million over 4 years, you draft a bucket that you only have to pay $30 million over 4 years. Get your 6th man of the future. There is a reason that most of these lottery teams are in the lottery. Sure, it's a lack of talent, but it's also a lack of shooting. All Knecht is going to do is make his teammates' lives easier. Vassell and Wemby need space to operate in the pick and roll. You can't leave Knecht open. Sohan is forced to pick up the ball with 5 seconds on the shot clock. Knecht's going to give you a better chance than anyone in this draft to make a tough bucket, to make that grenade. His upside isn't all the way there with the rest of the top 10 picks, but if you want to win the most basketball games you can in the next 2 to 3 years, you draft him, especially if you are 2 picks into the lottery. Now there's one guy that I have number 2 on my overall big board, and that's Matas. Matas Buzelis is a guy that I fully believe in, but I can understand the hesitation that GMs have with this terrible 3-point shooting year with the Ignite. But I don't think he's a great fit with San Antonio. I think having Matas and Jeremy Sohan on the same roster seems a bit redundant, and normally you wouldn't think about Jeremy Sohan if you're picking top 10, but Matas is an exception where you probably need to prioritize his growth for him to be effective, and I don't think he'd have a chance to develop with the San Antonio Spurs. This video was a guide of how the San Antonio Spurs can win the 2024 NBA Draft. I'll leave an entire review of the video on the screen right now in case it got a bit confusing, and that's because so much can happen on NBA draft night that there's really no one definitive answer. And I believe they have a couple second round picks, so down below in the comments I'm going to write about a couple of the second round picks that I think could really help swing their entire draft. But yeah, I really hope that I opened your guys' minds a little bit about who to draft, because if you're really stubborn about one player and don't think they should draft anyone else, then you're just being stubborn. I spent a lot of time on this video, so please, if you made it all the way through, please like the video. If you want to see more, subscribe, and comment just your opinions on any of the prospects that I mentioned, because it's really interesting. I'll try and respond to every single comment when I can. But yeah, thanks for watching. Peace out.